Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome officially to the channel. This is our, well, I hope going to be popular villains and horror series, and this week I'm going into a fairly popular and endearing villain that most of you likely already know, Michael Myers from the Halloween series. And yes, this is another one that I'm doing early since it's one of the ones with fewer appearances and a little harder to track down information on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Michael Myers is a bit of an oddity, coming out with his first film in 1978 and for the most part starting up, or rather popularizing, the slasher genre that we know today, that was also likely inspired by an earlier movie you may know of, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Michael is mostly an impassive blank slate, an unrelenting, uncompromising force of, well, evil. To best sum him up, here's a quote from Dr. Samuel Loomis, his psychiatrist. "I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding. Even the most rudimentary sense of life and death, good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with a blank slate. Pale, motionless face, and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized what was living behind the boy's eyes was purely and simply evil." Michael seems to possess some form of superhuman strength, stealth, and durability.
Feed it with brute force.
If we only knew then what we know now.
Along with a singular drive and intelligence that drives him. He's been shot, stabbed, thrown down a well, burned alive, electrocuted, and decapitated, and yet still manages to come back time and time again. His signature weapon of choice tends to be what looks to be a kitchen knife, though he's been known to use almost any weapon that he can conveniently find to dispatch his victims. As to his chosen victims, that gets fuzzy. You see, in his 11-movie span or more, he's had multiple reboots and motivations. The main constant is that it's the night of Halloween, and it's always on Halloween and always in Haddonfield. His most common motivation is the extermination of his family, whose last surviving member is Laurie Strode. The reasons for this persistent need to kill his family, a mission that started when he was 6, mind you, is never really truly explained. Now, in the Thorn timeline, Michael is betrayed as the bearer of a curse, the Curse of the Thorn. This tasks the bearer to sacrifice his or her own family on Halloween night. This curse is meant to spare the community from death and natural disasters. Most of this only really comes out in the producer's cut of the movie, where he's depicted as a supernaturally bound slave to the cult of the curse. This explains a lot more of his seemingly inhuman powers. However, in all the continuities, Michael is a motionless, remorseless, and supremely focused killer, made all the more terrifying by the fact that in his entire history, he's never really been explained or made relatable to the audience. His motives and drives are known only to him and to him alone, and he's not talking. Michael's made all the more terrifying by the visage that they made for him, and that's of a quiet, impassive man around 6 foot tall, commonly in a jumpsuit, wearing a white mask that sits on him in such a way that you often can't see his eyes, giving that kind of eyeless, soulless look. The mask itself is a modified James Kirk mask. Yeah, no joke. Literally a James Kirk mask. With the eyes cut out and painted white to give it more of an unearthly visage. Honestly, looking at Michael's motivations, personality, and background don't really lead too well to much other than a rather intimidating set piece, but that hasn't really stopped him from having a few games. Mind you, it really isn't that many, but they go all the way back to the Atari 2600, so let's go ahead and start there, shall we? Released in 1983. Really? Right during the video game crash? Okay, well that's not ominous in its own at all. The game's a fairly basic game, focused heavily on a babysitter that the player controls, who's trying to save as many children as she can from an unnamed knife-wielding killer who's likely just left unnamed so they wouldn't really have to pay licensing for the game as a whole. The player can earn points in 2 ways: rescuing children and taking them to safe rooms located on either end of the floor of the house, and secondly by stabbing the killer with a knife that you find, assuming you can locate one. The player advances a level either by rescuing 5 children or stabbing the killer twice. As with most Atari games, the difficulty goes up with each level, with the killer getting faster in each level. This was reportedly a fairly controversial title at the time, with many retailers refusing to carry it due to the subject matter and the content, which would have the player's head replaced with a pulsing blood from the neck when killed. In fact, retailers were so nervous about it, they would commonly keep it behind the counter and only pull it out upon request. Oddly enough, this and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game that Wizard Video made drove the company into bankruptcy, and many of the remaining copies of the Halloween game that were sold without labels and just a simple white sticker put on the front with Halloween written on it to cut costs. I would imagine it also didn't have much of a box either. This in turn actually led to even more stores rejecting the game based on the appearance alone. This, and in part due to how reluctant people were to sell the game and how quickly the company declined. Both this game and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game are pretty highly valued among collectors at this point. Now, the next game I was actually able to find is called Michael Myers Rampage. This was a rather simple flash game that, unlike most of the movies, this game would not really focus on Laurie Strode, Michael's main nemesis in the series, but more on him just going on to killing Rampage. Michael would be presented with a number of victims, and you'd have to choose which knife attack would most likely hit the ever-moving target. Then at the end of the stage, you'd be given a score based on number of hits, damage, time taken, etc. It's a fairly simplistic game that, given it's in Flash, looks like it's not only plays pretty well, but it looks good also. It's unlikely that this game is still up and available to play though, as Adobe officially dropped support for Flash back in 2021, leaving this pretty much a lost relic in Halloween's history. Another more official game to come out would be Escape Michael Myers. This is a tie-in game to the Halloween Ends movie that's coming out hopefully the same day this video is released. In this game, you're tasked with running away from Michael for as long as you can in a classic endless runner style gameplay. The goal is simple: survive as long as you can in a 16-bit inspired endless runner till you eventually get caught and killed by Myers himself. I'm sure this one is fun for those who enjoy that type of game, or just want something Halloween themed during this time of year to celebrate the season or new movie coming out. However, it pales in comparison to what other companies and fans have done for the franchise. So first up, let's talk about Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4. If you're not a fan of this game, don't worry, I'm really not either. I'm generally not a fan of the Call of Duty series as a whole, but in this one they actually did something pretty cool. In this, you had to fulfill a specific criteria, which in this case was a melee kill, and then you can request a care package. This would drop and have a chance of dropping you the ability to turn into Michael Myers. As you would expect, all of your attacks in this mode are melee, but instead of using the iconic weapon, a chef's knife, he would wield an axe. I'm unsure why this is the case. It's possible they already had this as an asset in the game already, or it could have just looked better to the designers, who knows. It hardly matters though, since Michael was, well, known for using pretty much anything available to get the job done. You also move exceedingly fast to compensate for the fact that you're limited to melee weapons alone. Again, not very iconic to the character's more slow-paced stalking method, but it works better for the game balance as a whole, and makes what looks like to be a fairly fun experience for the player, and probably frustrating for anybody being chased by Michael Myers at the time, quite frankly. This wouldn't be the end for Michael Myers being in a video game. Oh no, Dead by Daylight. That's right, the asymmetrical slasher game, the same one that brought Pinhead finally to his own game, would bring Michael Myers as well, whose gameplay honestly looks more direct, if a bit more complicated to build potentially than Pinhead's builds. There isn't much new to say about this. Michael will have an obsession with a particular character on the board till they're hooked, and over time his obsession will change to a new target. He has ways of making other players oblivious to his presence, making it easier for him to sneak up on them and deal massive damage to them as well. It's important to note that most playstyles I talk about here are just ones that I've found. There are multiple ways to build and play almost any of these villains in the game, so that the player can find a way that they like best to play a given villain in the game. Now we get to my favorite part of the video. As fans of the series and games as a whole, do what big studios and movie tie-in games have failed to do, and that's give us a truly good, if not epic, Halloween game. I was able to find roughly 2 or 3 of these, and it's by no means intended to be a comprehensive list, just what I was able to find. These are very good games in my opinion. that catch the full spirit of the series. I'll be dropping links to these to get as many of these as I can in the description below for those of you curious to try these bite-sized games yourself, because none of these are really very long, they're just very good. You'll have to pardon me because most of these just kind of have simplistic names. The first up is Halloween. I literally think it's just called Halloween. This one has you taking the role of a young girl stuck in a hospital with Michael Myers. Having become his current obsession, you must work your way through the hospital. It's loosely based around the events of Halloween 2. In this, you're tasked with avoiding Michael Myers and finding a way to navigate and escape before Michael Myers finds you. This is a relatively short, but high-quality game, running around 12 minutes or so. I believe it's designed in the Unreal 4 engine. The atmosphere and presence of Myers in this game is undeniable as you frantically run around watching him kill the entire hospital staff in his pursuit of you. This, in my opinion, is one of the best examples of what can be done with a property like this when it's done right. It has the lighting, the presence, and sense of fear and vulnerability the game like this needs so that you can feel the weight of what's coming for you. Another one that I managed to find is, again, Halloween. This one was released originally October 31st of 2021, but updated again around July of this year. It's a fan-made game based on the original movie released in 1978. In this, you play a babysitter who's taking care of a young boy by the name of Tommy, when you receive a creepy phone call causing you to send him to bed and lock all the windows. You thought that was it, until you end up with the fight for your life. This one is a little bit more active, with the player having a way to defend themselves in their home. Much like the other one, it's a fairly short experience with anywhere between 6 to 12 minute runtime, depending on how much time you spend exploring it. This one I actually think is almost better than the first one, because it even shows you some of the clips of the original movie playing on the TV that Tommy was watching before you actually send him to bed, and has that same sense of terror but with a dash of hope, as you have weapons to defend yourself with. Anyway, Slice It, Michael has been a driving force in the horror genre since he was first introduced. His unrepentant, single-minded focus has made him a mysterious and terrifying icon of horror, made all the more unnerving by his detachment and lack of background. This makes him feel even more disconnected, alien, and terrifying to many, but what do you guys think of Michael Myers in these games? Do any of them interest you? Would you like to see more of them explored in more depth? Do you think Michael has what it takes to drive his own game or series of games? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching and spending part of your day with me. And if you could, do me one more favor, hit the like button. And if you're not, consider subscribing as well. It really helps my channel out. However, until next time, have a great rest of your day and happy gaming.